In 1848, the Communist Manifesto was written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. This manifesto outlined 10 immediate steps in the creation of an ideal communist state. They bore a striking resemblance to the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, suggesting to some that they shared common origins. These steps within the Communist Manifesto included abolition of private property, a progressive or graduated income tax, abolition of all inheritance, confiscation of all property of dissidents and immigrants, creation of a monopolistic central bank with state capital to control credit, centralization of all communication and transport, state control over factories and farm production, state ownership of all capital, and the creation of a deployable labor force, combining agriculture with manufacturing industries, and the gradual distribution of the population to blur the distinction between towns and rural country. And finally, free public education to all children. Now let's look at each of these individually. Being that it's been over 100 years since the Communist Manifesto was written, it is shocking to see how many of these have come true. The first is the abolition of private property. Here in America, almost all locations require a property tax. Otherwise, if you do not pay, your property can be seized by the local or state government. In essence, in the modern day here in the United States, you are renting land from the government. You do not own it. This violates the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, which states that we have the right to be secure in our property. But if you can't own property, how can you be secure in it? The next is a progressive or graduated income tax. My grandfather was the first generation that this was introduced to when he was a child. At first, it was a very small tax, and over time, the income tax became more and more of a burden. Today, we see it and we don't even think about it. It comes out of our paychecks and we don't even notice that it's gone. We get excited at the end of the year because we know that before you know it, we'll be able to file taxes and get some of that back. But we should be pissed off and angry that the government held our money that entire year and taxed us because we're workers, because we're productive. This income tax does not give people who work harder the incentive to continue to work harder. You get taxed more the harder you work and the more successful you are. This tax system is communist in nature. Be aware of that. The abolition of all inheritance is the next one. Luckily, though, to my knowledge, in the United States, there's no state that has the abolition of all inheritance. There are states, though, that have ridiculous tax laws and that they tax the estate of the deceased. So the relatives. It could be simply a son or a daughter isn't able to get the fullness of what their parents worked for. What a sham. That's communist as well. Next is the confiscation of all property of dissidents and immigrants. We do see this on some level currently. If you say too much, if you push against the system too much, law, the government, whatever you want to call it, will come down on you. There are countless numbers of people that have disappeared, that have been killed, that have, everything they have has been taken because they spoke against the government. They created pressure on certain key people in power. This is why it's dangerous to talk about certain things, even here in America, because there are people that want to control you, and they don't want to lose control that they have currently. They're always trying to get more control. So it's a dangerous world we live in. That's why when you see politicians and they never get hurt or they continue to do what they're doing, you have to wonder, either they have very good security, which in a lot of cases they do, or they're going along with the master plan. They're just puppets, and most of them are just puppets. So they can pretty much guarantee their safety by not rocking the boat. So we have to watch this one, though, because down the road, we're going to continue to see more examples of confiscation of property from those who dissent against the government. The creation of a monopolistic central bank with state capital to control credit. I think that we don't have to look that far to see that this one's true already as well. You have the Federal Reserve here in the U.S. You have the World Bank. You have several central banks in the world that control massive state capital, control credit, control the direction of economies. I mean, just look at Africa, how they got swept into this mess. And they can't pay their debts, and they're having to relinquish control of natural resources. It could be anything from minerals to water access, you name it. And there's countries all around the world having that same problem. They're getting kind of swept in because of bad choices, because of debt to the central banks, and they can't get out of it. Because guess who's going to come to the bank's aid if they don't pay and they try to push back those countries? You're going to get NATO. You're going to get soldiers that are come in there and forced by the gun. It's very sad that the whole state of affairs when it comes to the central bank, the New World Order is in overdrive, controlling the whole directive here. We have some countries that are going almost completely cashless, or they're very near it right now. This is very dangerous. We've talked about it on the channel before. Centralizing anything is just a nightmare waiting to happen. You have someone or just a few people in control, it is a recipe for not only mishandling, but for abuse. The next is the centralization of all communication and transport. I mean, what do you call Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, and then what might be another one or two networks, and that's about it. It's like a handful of networks that all work together, share infrastructure on some level, at least in most cities. It's very disturbing. All the communication goes through pretty much the same filter. NSA, CIA, you name it. They're listening, they're recording everything. This is part of the control system. What about centralized transport? What do you call Greyhound buses and airports. If you really want to travel distances and you can't do it by vehicle, like your own personal vehicle, there's a monopoly out there and you have to show ID. And as you guys probably know, that the IDs are becoming more selective now. In airports, here in a very short period of time, you're not going to be able to just show a driver's license and be able to get on a plane. You're going to have a special driver's license. I believe it's called Real ID. Or you're going to have a passport to travel in your own country. This is part of the centralized control. State control over factories and farm production. What do you call subsidies? I'd say that has a lot of control over the farmers. And factories as well. Look at the bailouts. The GM, Ford, and others recently. These state controls manipulate the economy and the state of affairs in terms of what's going on into society. So it's happening. This one is also very true on all levels. The next is state ownership of all capital and the creation of a deployable labor force. Well, being that the Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air, in some ways they already own all capital in that sense. Now, the creation of a deployable labor force, you could argue that our military is being used as that. I mean, look at the drama right now all around the world. Who do they send to those locations, those hot zones? Our troops. And a lot of people say, no, it's NATO. Who do you think makes up most of NATO? Who do you think funds NATO? At least the majority of it. The United States. Oh, it happens to be our tax money. Oh, wow. So let's wake up, people. And I need to wake up more myself. That's why I'm making this video. Because it's time to talk about this stuff. It's time to be alert and see how things are. The United States of America, in my opinion, is falling right in front of us. Not only should we be more prepared than ever, but we need to get our head straight and know who the enemy is. Next, in the Communist Manifesto, it talks about combining agriculture with manufacturing industries. Now, this is very interesting because this is certainly happening right now, and it's been happening gradually over the last few decades. Agriculture and manufacturing. I mean, who do you think runs most of these farms and these dairy networks? You know, lumber. All these places are owned by large corporations. Large. There's no, I mean, hardly any, in fact. Even in my rural area, there's hardly any real family-owned farms. It's just amazing. You go to these so-called farms and then you learn that Tyson owns that farm or they're renting that farm. And they're just, employing the locals to manage the farm. So there's certainly a combining of agriculture and manufacturing industries to date. And lastly, free public education to all children. Of course, it's free. Just like in a lot of places, they say the free local library. But I'm not sure about you, but I think I pay quite a bit of tax every year for the free library and this free education that I'm forced to pay for my neighbors to go to school. Let's say that you have no kids, but you are forced to pay for your neighbor's kids, maybe someone else's kids in the county, whatever. You're forced to pay for them to go to school, even though they're not your kids. Now, when you inquire about this, as I have over the years, the only thing you pretty much get is that they say it's for the common good. It's for the common good. What about my common good? When is it a time that I'm not going to be forced to pay for other people's needs? If I choose not to have kids, then why should I be burdened with the tax to educate these other people that I have nothing to do with. I wish them the best, but I have nothing to do with them. And then the whole topic of what are they supposedly educating these kids, or our kids, if you have kids. And that's a whole nother video topic, because it's just more than ridiculous. It's brainwashing. It's trying to neutralize the whole ideology of what communism is, because they use soft terms like socialism. It's a brainwashing like you've never seen before. The modern day school systems are filled with teachers that are teaching our kids, our neighbors' kids, that things are supposed to be a certain way. Things are supposed to be a certain way, but these certain things don't make sense to us as parents or neighbors. They conflict with our morals. Most of us do not believe in communism, but a lot of these teachers, deep down, when you really get to know them, you'd be shocked of how many people think it's okay to be a little bit socialist, to be a little communist. It's okay. The future of America is really threatened right now. We have lots of enemies, not just from the outside, but internally.